Oh, hi, Mark.
Oh, hey, Johnny, what's up?
I have a problem with Lisa. She says that I hit her.
What? Well, did you?
No, it's not true. Don't even ask.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 139 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're talking with comedian Jimmy Failla. He's the host of a great new podcast, Everbody Calm Down. It's the show we need now more than ever. Really. More on that in a minute. You know, there's one thing I really hate doing. It's critiquing my fellow film critics. I love Jojo Rabbit. I think it's one of the best films of the year. You hated it? So what? Art is subjective. Deal with it. Grow a thicker skin. It's like how any negative review of a comic book movie draws out the angry nerd brigade. Sorry, fellow nerds. You know what I'm talking about, right? But the reviews for No Safe Spaces, a documentary we've talked about a lot in this show, well, they're different. And I have no qualms blasting those reviews and those reviewers. They deserve it. First up is the Denver Post, which I can personally tell you is a failing newspaper that basically recycles the Washington Post every day. They said the film was as one-sided as a Michael Moore documentary. That is so blatantly false that the critic should be ashamed of himself. But he's not done yet. Here's a direct quote from the review. The real problem is that the conservative ideals and voices are being silenced at an alarming rate, it argues. A glance at national politics, the popularity of Fox News, the decline of print journalism, and Carolla and Prager's own fortunes would seem to undercut that. Oh yeah, because some conservative ideas are leaking out, well, it's okay that others are canceled. Just brilliant. Still, that lame review is a gem compared to what the LA Times uncorked. They gave the movie as little attention in print as possible, but it still embarrassed itself in the process. The headline for the review says the film sides with one set of voices. Well, wrong. One set of voices is being silenced at the moment. The film never ever says, hey, why don't you go silence the other side instead? Sheer idiocy. It gets worse. Here's another direct quote from the LA Times. Among those passed off as representing the liberal side of the debate, meanwhile, are attorney and Trump defender Alan Dershowitz and libertarian-leaning YouTube personality Dave Rubin. Well, Dershowitz isn't just a Trump defender. He's a long-time respected liberal and a defender of free speech. Good on him. Plus, the critic ignores two key voices in the film, Van Jones from CNN and Dr. Cornel West, both prominent liberal voices. Both people are aghast at what's happening on college campuses nationwide. But that didn't really fit the LA Times' agenda, right? Got to put that out. Now, as you may or may not know, media bias is a huge problem in journalism, and it's getting much worse every day. I can't even imagine what it's going to look like in 6 months, 7 months. Heaven help us right before the national election. But there's an existing problem with entertainment journalism bias as well. That's just as worse. Makes me crazy. It's also why I work 7 days a week on both HollywoodInToto.com and this podcast. And you know, as a critic, I don't mind giving a good review, if not a rave review, to left-of-center products or extremely woke movies. When it's called for, I'm happy to do it. I did it with Booksmart, and I was ready to do it with Charlie's Angels, but that one happened to be a steaming pile of, well, you know what. I just wish other critics would be as fraction as balanced as I am. And now here's the hit tweet of the week. This week's winner is Deborah Messing. When old Deb isn't starring in the increasingly low-rated Will and Grace. Boy, did the bottom drop out of that rating situation. She's bloviating on Twitter. This week, she's connecting Roger Stone's guilty verdict to, well, everything. Here's her tweet. To those of you who still defend the president, who lie for him, take note. Hashtag Roger Stone guilty of all counts. Hashtag truth exposed. Hashtag impeachment hearings. Yeah, because one man's guilt means everyone else tied to the Trump orbit is guilty too. Beauty logic, eh?
Don't touch that dial. You're listening to my daddy's podcast.
This week's hit tip of the week is The Mandalorian. Yes, the first original show from Disney Plus continues the Star Wars saga. Sort of. The show follows a bounty hunter not named Boba Fett, going about his very dangerous business. The first episode does little more than establish that, and that's okay. You gotta start somewhere. The main purpose, right off the bat, is to remind us we're watching a Star Wars story. Look, there's a Jawa! Hey, that creepy puppet is the one that was in the Jabba's lair, wasn't he? And that droid sure looks familiar. Now, I think we can have a separate debate about what makes a Star Wars product in the first place. Is it the use of blasters? The name-dropping of the Empire? Is there something else involved? But let's push that aside for now. The Mandalorian's first episode is just fun. The action beats are rock solid, kind of like watching a major movie, honestly. And so are the production values. Gosh, TV shows today drop so much coin, they look just like your average film, if not better. It's amazing. I grew up with watching TV shows that you knew from an instant visual snapshot, that's a TV show, not a movie. That line is no more. It's been obliterated. And The Mandalorian is just another good example. Now, the show is available now on Disney Plus. They're releasing one new episode a week, kind of like old school times, but gotta wait and see what's happening next. Now, the service is new. It's $6.99 a month, but if you go to the site right now for Disney Plus, you can sign up for a free weekly trial. Why not give it a try?
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
I don't drink whiskey, but all of a sudden I want to be a Michter's guy, and it's all Jimmy Failla's fault. The comedian and head writer for Fox Business's Kennedy Show just started a podcast asking both conservatives and liberals to calm down and be good people. You know, be a Michter's guy, echoing his show's whiskey sponsor. Translation? Don't let your ideology make you a jerk. We have much more in common than that. And we can all drink to that, right? The Jimmy Show, Everybody Calm Down, does more than reach across the aisle. It reminds us that we're living in the greatest country in the world at the most amazing time ever. Fact check, true. Another fact check, Jimmy's a really funny guy, with a wit as quick as anyone I've heard in quite some time. He proves it on Everybody Calm Down, as well as his Blue Rush podcast. That show is dedicated to the G-Men, the New York Giants. Tough year, good show, though. And if that weren't enough gigs for Jimmy, he also oversees A-List Comedy. It's a service that provides funny bits to radio stations and personalities across the country, audio, digital, you name it. And you know what? Somehow between all these different gigs, he found enough free time to talk to the HitCast, and we couldn't be more grateful. Here's my chat with the ultimate Michter's guy, Jimmy Failla. Well, Jimmy, you went from driving cabs to stand-up comedy, and I know it's been successful. You're doing a lot of different gigs now, but during that transition, was there a single moment, maybe like a great Killer Mike, maybe a compliment from one of your colleagues that you thought, I'm going to do this. Like, this is happening. It isn't just a dream. It isn't just an attempt, but it's going to happen. Or was it more gradual than that?
I mean, here's the thing. When you're driving a cab and doing stand-up comedy, I guess the easiest way I could explain it to you is you're doing comedy in the cab, like for all intents and purposes. Because in the beginning, when people get into your cab, you try to crack them up because you don't want them to like stab you in the head in traffic. And then by the 6 months into your career, you stop doing comedy because you hope they stab you in the head in traffic because you don't want to be in a cab anymore. But the actual moment of like, hey, this is going to work. I think we all get into showbiz with a base level of delusion that's allowed us to overlook like so much of statistical probability and so many failed people who've tried to do what you're attempting to do that I think everyone who gets into showbiz is operating on like a sociopathic level in the beginning. So the moment is just that moment you decided you were going to get into it, I guess, if that makes sense. It doesn't mean it's based in any reality, and it doesn't mean it's justified or reinforced by fact. It's just one day you decide you're going to do this crazy thing where the odds of you making it are like 1 in 22 trillion. It's basically like comedy is like an Elizabeth Warren DNA test for all intents and purposes. But you can go for it. She went for it. Some of us go for it.
That's right. It reminds me of the American Idol, the first round where the people who can't carry a note in a bucket are out there singing their hearts out, thinking this is it. This is their moment. And they know, they don't realize that it's not going to work out at all.
Oh, it's adorable. What happens in comedy, though, is for some of those people, it does work out. And that's what keeps people motivated. It's like people who are terrible comics get famous all the time because a lot of these shows are like casting exercises where they're putting people on TV. This would be a good example. There was a long-running connotation in the 80s and 90s that women weren't funny, which isn't true. But the reason that stereotype existed is because they used to cast comedy shows for TV. So they would always find the hottest girl they could and make her the female comic. And 9 times out of 10, she was a good casting aesthetically, but she wasn't funny. So they set back the perception of female comics. And that's a lot of what happens in comedy is like because so much of it's casting, you'll frequently see people that none of us think are funny, like printing money. It's kind of crazy. So we're like in a reverse American Idol. Like I once opened for Dat Fan. He won America's Got Talent. And normally when you're an MC at a comedy club, you do 15 and you bring on the headliner to do 45. But when like America's Got Talent happened, and the guys like me who were working at Caroline's, they were like, yeah, you're MCing this weekend. You're going to be doing 45 up front because the other people didn't have the time. You dig? Wow. It's crazy. Yeah. There's a lot so it goes both ways. There are a lot of great comics but there are a lot of bad comics who make it too. And I blame them because they keep a lot of people in the game years longer than they probably should.
That's right. I want to switch to your podcast, Everybody Calm Down. The show is asking the left and the right to, hey, just get along, be good people, put all the sticks aside. I was kind of curious, when you were making that show and kind of creating the idea behind it, were you sensing a hunger for that? Or did you say, hey, I'm just going to be an outlier. I'm just going to bring it and have a different perspective?
I think at this point we're still an outlier. But I see that market emerging in that a lot of people at this point are just exhausted from politics. And I think the vast majority of people in both parties hate cancel culture and the outrage mob so much that I wanted to cater to those people who just wanted to have conversations and didn't have time to get offended and weren't looking to score points off of it. But the basis for me doing this show for real, is that I don't think comics should be trying to steer votes. Like we're the last people on earth that should be in charge of our democracy. We all come from broken homes. We all have substance abuse problems. Like there's no reason we should be taking the wheel. So I kind of, for real, I really just wanted to create like an audio safe space for cool people where people could just be cool. Because like one of my frustrations at Fox is that a lot of our viewers just assume like I'll hear things like, oh, I can't watch that panel because Juan Williams is on. But like, yo, we love Juan Williams at Fox. Like there's nobody in the building who hates the guy. Even though we might have vast political differences, we love to hang out with the guy and have a beer with the guy. And I think the country has gotten away from that. Then that's basically why I wanted to do this show is I wanted to establish the fact that there's a lot of us that can't stand each other's views, but love hanging out. Like Antoine Seawright, who works for, as an advisor to Hillary Clinton, should be, in the modern Thunderdome vernacular of American social media, he should be my arch nemesis. But there is no one on earth I'd rather hang out with. Like if you're going to Los Angeles and Antoine Seawright happens to be there, assuming you have some bribe money for the cops, he's a great guy to hang out with.
And by the way, I'm pretty conservative, generally speaking. My wife is a Bernie fan, so we kind of live that day to day here and keep things kind of quiet. But we have managed to work about 13 or 14 years of marriage, but it can be done. It's funny. I grew up in New York, and I kind of connect with people like you who have that New York moxie. It's hard to describe sometimes. There's an energy there, but I can see absolutely where that is a killer proving ground for comedy. You get the energy, you get the excitement, there's creativity. You got to be quite quick on your feet, mentally speaking. Is there anything negative about being New York as a stand-up comic? Is there sort of a downside where you think, well, I don't connect because of this, or maybe these attitudes don't help me there? I'm kind of curious.
This is what it is. It's easy to New York. There's a shorthand to living here. And what I mean by that is that a lot of New York comics can crush in the city And the detriment is none of the material they do here works on the road because it is very much a bubble. And there's a lot of shared culture here in the city in that, you know, like everybody has subway jokes. Everybody has jokes about the homeless guy. Everybody has jokes about the traffic. But when you go on the road to like Wilmington, Delaware, they don't have that, you know, they don't have the subway. They don't have the traffic, and your material doesn't always translate as well. So what happens in New York is a lot of people, because it is a very like isolated mindset, is a lot of people think they're better at comedy than they are. And Donald Trump would be a good example of that. You can tell Trump jokes in New York that murder. So you think you've really like cured cancer up there on stage, but then you go on the road where the vast majority of the country supports the guy and your Trump stuff doesn't work, you know? So New York can be a detriment. It's good because you're surrounded by great comics who go harder than they do anywhere else in the country, but it's bad because the audience as a whole has a very singular mindset. So you can't always trust their feedback outside of New York. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. I actually want to ask you about Trump. And, you know, on the surface, you think, oh, he's the greatest thing for comedy. He's so wacky. He's so, you know, interesting. He's so off the cuff. I would think it'd be really hard to tell a great Trump joke in 2019 and even maybe 2020. Where do you kind of stand on dealing with jokes about him and kind of not doing the clapper routine, which could be kind of exhausting?
Like I don't do a ton of Trump jokes because I feel like we have enough of them. Like Trump jokes are like Democratic candidates, you know? It's like God love Michael Bloomberg for thinking we needed one more Democrat to jump into the race. But like my whole thing on Trump jokes is that he's really hurt comics for two reasons. One, the aforementioned New York thing, where if you're in New York and LA, you think you're a much better comic than you are because your Trump material kills here and nowhere else. But two, the real reason he's hurt comedy is it's really hard to cartoon something that's already funny on its face. That's the first challenge he presents. The second challenge is that there's no shelf life to material anymore, meaning he's creating so much content every single day that if like you were doing like a Kofefi joke, like you look insane. Like no one even remembers that, you know, because he's just spitting out new stuff all the time. So it's pretty hard to keep up with. And he's almost set comedy back in that regard. Like it used to be if you did political humor, like let's say you were the political comic of your time. Bill Clinton, you know, liked women. George Bush couldn't say the word nuclear. And you had those things to hang your hat on for like 6 to 8 months at a time. Whereas Trump, whatever he's talking about Monday, we're probably not talking about Thursday. So it's a whole mess.
Yeah, it is interesting. Are there any comedians out there that you think are telling really good Trump jokes? Not pro or con, but just funny.
Oh, wow. Shoot. Colbert, no. I mean, Colbert, Kimmel, and Seth Meyers have actually like set back comedy in the sense because they're not even doing comedy at this point. They're just giving a partisan lecture. Like if the laughs outnumber, you know, the applause, that's one thing. But when the applause outnumber the laughs, it means you're just doing a lecture. In terms of who's done a funny Trump joke that I like, one of the funniest things I read on the internet was, do you remember when Trump sent that national emergency test where he was testing the emergency system with a tweet or text? Anyway, sent a national text from the White House. Somebody had written, "This is the first text Tiffany Trump has ever gotten from her father." And I just thought it was funny. I'm sure he talks to her and he loves her and she's great, but I thought it was worded well and it was funny. So I can concede that I've read Trump things that crack me up, but most people, I don't laugh at it. It's because you can see their motivation in the joke. Like the reason Alec Baldwin sucks on Saturday Night Live as Trump is because you can see how much he hates the guy. And he's not just portraying it so you laugh at Trump. He's portraying it because he wants to steer your vote, which is not comedy. It's activism.
Yeah, in the past, Saturday Night Live players would have maybe even a cordial relationship with the people that they mocked, and it wasn't mean-spirited. There was something else there. Let's just focus maybe a year from now. It's President Elizabeth Warren, for better or worse. Do you think that those late-night hosts, that the comedy folks are going to revert back to where they were? And will audiences even accept them if they go back to where they were? I mean, or is comedy sort of political humor stained indefinitely?
If a Democrat wins, they're going to keep doing what they do now. They're not going to hit the president. They're just going to keep hitting Republicans. So the jokes are going to be about Mitch McConnell and how he's opposing her, or Trey Gowdy, or whoever the heck happens to be the biggest thorn in President Warren's side that week. They're still going to be partisan. We don't go back now. But there will be that double standard that you're referencing here, in that they're not going to go after a Democrat as hard as they went after a Republican. Because what's happened is there's no market for them to, because they've consciously ostracized half of the country. So there's why would they make fun of Elizabeth Warren? Because their audience loves her.
Yeah.
And it's really like, I'm not a marketing genius, but the idea that like anyone's getting on television in this day and age and being like, half of you shouldn't watch this, just seems limited in its aspiration,
It is, but I think that the fact that the media landscape is so niche oriented, you can be successful where a Carson back in the day couldn't do that, but a Leno or sort of a Fallon or a Kimmel can do that. I was kind of curious, on a day-to-day level, you're cranking out so much comedy. There's so many platforms you write for. Do you have a little kind of pad that you bring with you, or is your phone your recording device, or how do you kind of collect all the things that come to your mind? Because you've got to put out so much material.
You know what, man? I'm like, in a course of a given day, for real, like I have to write, I'm the head writer for 200 radio stations. Basically, A-List Comedy is a prep service, and it spits out topical jokes to 200 stations, basically subscribe to it, and they use the stuff on the air as their own. So like I'm writing from like 7 a.m. to like 10 p.m. every day. So there's no storing ideas because it's constantly kinetic energy. It's just always in motion. So I don't really walk around with a pad. I mean, I'll occasionally put a note in my phone for like a broadcast I'm going to do. But basically between like podcasting and doing Kennedy, being on TV and all that jazz, like I really am going like 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. like 5 days a week. But it doesn't seem insane to me because I used to drive a cab, which is like those same hours, except you're getting cut off and shot at in New York City traffic. 15, 16-hour days where you're really just laughing all day. Like I don't really consider it a job. I'm sure it sounds like hard work, but it's really funny to me.
Does the well ever go dry even temporarily?
Yeah, definitely. This is what happens. Before you become a professional writer, you're only writing when you feel like it. You don't know that at the time. You know what I mean? You write. You some days write 3 days a week, some days you write 5 days a week. But looking back, you were only writing when you wanted to. You were never forcing yourself to write. When you're a professional comedy writer, or any writer for that matter, you've got to write every day, whether you feel like it or not. So I always say this, like being like writing comedy for a living, it's often, not to get too highbrow, but you're often like a stripper who has the farts. It's like you've got to get up there and be sexy, but you're not necessarily feeling like you're in a sexy mood.
Right. That is pretty highbrow, but it's a
yeah, sorry. It's way out. I didn't mean to get all intellectual on your audience. They deserve better.
We'll explain it with puppets later on. Actually, my website is I run it 7 days a week, and people some say, "Oh, do you get writer's block?" I'm like, "No, I can't. I literally cannot because I have to keep the site humming. Otherwise, people are going to go away." I was also kind of curious. You're the kind of guy who's pretty open about comedy. You go in different directions. You're not afraid of certain police out there. But are there any topics that you just don't go near, or anything you kind of mentally will put the brakes on? Not for any outward pressure, but just your inward sort of thought control.
Yeah, definitely. Like I don't do anything that's like gratuitous sex, where it's like descriptive and disgusting, and basically like stuff that would make me uncomfortable in a mixed audience. And it's like, I don't know, the best way I could explain this to you is like, I was once, when my mom turned 50, we took her to the comic strip, and somebody was doing crowd work in the front row. I think it was like Sherrod Small. And I hadn't started doing comedy yet, but me and my brother were in the front row, and the comedian was just screaming and yelling about how banging 50-year-old women is the greatest thing in the world. And it happened to be my mom's 50th birthday, which of course became the focus of his set. And it was just like so cringy and stupid. And I got the value in us all laughing and having that uncomfortable subject addressed in front of my mom, but I don't want to be the one who does it to other people.
Gotcha.
So I usually it's usually like gratuitous sex stuff. I'm really not trying to do like bathroom humor or anything like that, because I think for me it's like I'm more I guess that I write about things I feel like talking about, like things I think need to be said. And I don't think every comic has like their favorite 20 dick jokes. Excuse me if you got to beep that out. I apologize. But I certainly have mine too. I've probably written 1 billion dick jokes in my lifetime. But I think I'm at a place now where I like to go on stage and just talk about things I think need to be said about society. And it's very rarely is that like the sexual realm.
Gotcha. One of the things you did and got a lot of attention for was the snakes in a cab prank. I'm sure as a comedian that was wonderful to get all that media glowing. But at the same time, there were some people who were angry about that. I mean, people are angry about everything. Did doing something like that was very high profile, does that teach you how to deal with the critics, the people who wanted this? Maybe this was before cancel culture was sort of certified. But what did that experience kind of
You know what
about
it does show you? It speaks to the short shelf life of stories and how we don't have a societal attention span anymore. And what I mean by that is that video, when it first went up on YouTube, it's been taken down like 5 times. When it first went up, it got 24 million hits in like 2 days. And I did like a legitimate like 75 to 100 TV hits. Like every TV show on earth called like, oh my God, you're the snake guy. We want to have you on the show. We want to talk about this. But there was this immediate drop off where for like almost 30 hours it was like the hottest story in the world. It was on the front of the New York Post. It was like a big deal. And by like the 35th hour, like the phone literally never rang once again. And it gave me like a good education because I deal with this stuff now at Kennedy. We're always doing like these topical storm videos where something goes viral and everybody's talking about it. But whatever that thing is, we stop talking about it hard, you know, like somewhere there's a bunker right now where like Chewbacca mom is hanging out with Ken Bone and an urn containing Grumpy Cat. And they're all just sitting there because they're like the ghosts of viral videos past. Double rainbow guys there serving hors d'oeuvres. It's crazy.
And I think Tosh is serving drinks in that particular arena. When you look at ahead of 2020, I can't even imagine where the culture will be, where the conversation will be, and where the comedy will be as far as the campaign. Do you have any predictions that are sort of maybe a little bit outside the box as far as where comedy will
I will
go?
say this. I'm sorry to cut you off. Finish your question because I'm hopped up, man. I'm caffeinated. I'm a married man. I got a kid. I had coffee. There's nobody in the house. I'm like a loony right now. So go ahead. I apologize.
No, I was just saying what's going to happen in 2020 from a comedic perspective. I think you can predict the Colberts will keep on Colberting. But is there anything maybe unexpected or something you'd like to do to kind of add to the conversation?
Well, yeah, what I think is going to happen is I think the comedy police are losing a lot of power right now. And I think you're going to see the narrative loosen up again. I think things that would have gotten comics fired 2 years ago are going to become acceptable again because both sides, both political parties have recognized the danger of cancel culture. And what I mean by that is that like President Obama spoke out last week at an event for his foundation. And he was telling the young audience that you can't do this woke purity thing because it's not sustainable and it's not tangible. It doesn't actually do anything aside from, administer digital dopamine over the internet. And basically the reason President Obama was speaking out against cancel culture is he knows it's a liability for his own party because the vast majority of the country identifies cancel culture with the left. And because of that, in an election that'll probably swing by 1 or 2 points, the left needs to distance itself from cancel culture. So what I think is ultimately going to happen is they will call off the free speech police. And it will lead to like a loosening up of standards for comics. And Chappelle's certainly leading the way, so you got to applaud him on that. I mean, the only way I'll tangibly lead the way is just by being a guy who reminds people that we don't need to give words so much power over our lives. So basically like my podcast and anything I do on Fox News Radio is like devoted to reminding people how great it is to live here. And how we're really in a fat, spoiled, stupid place when we're fighting over jokes. I mean, when you're trying to get a comedian fired because of something he tweeted, what you're really saying to the world is life is really good here. Nobody who's barbecuing a zoo animal in Venezuela right now is like, yeah, once we get done with that zebra, let's get back to Twitter because that's where the real problem is.
That's a great point. Dennis Miller recently came back from a trip in India, and he was so aghast at the conditions. He's like, how could anyone in America even have a microsecond to worry about that stuff? And it was a great point. Before we let you go, Jimmy, I want to end on a more positive note. I want to kind of tap into your specific mojo. You're the glass half full guy. And I think we all want to be that person, but we don't always get there. Any kind of introductory steps? I mean, I think what we just said is maybe the step one, but any sort of other just general life advice that you can kind of give to people?
I mean, I don't know. It's like an old woman told me in my cab once, like your attitude defines your experience. And if you have a good attitude, you have a good life. You have a bad attitude, you have a bad life. But basically, like when she was giving me this speech, she was talking about how, if you're lucky enough to get old, you're going to die. The only thing you're really going to wish is that you had more fun. So I kind of recognize the value of like, it's like a survival skill for me. Like the reason I'm an optimistic dude, beyond the drugs, obviously, but the reason I'm an optimistic dude is that, having fun is a way to make a lot of things that would otherwise suck be sustainable. So like the best time of my life was driving a cab. I don't miss it. I mean, it was an awful job. It was, people always say like, do you profile driving a cab? You don't profile driving a cab because when you're driving a cab, you want to die. You're hoping someone gets in and kills you. So, I mean, if I didn't pick you up in my taxi, it's because you didn't look dangerous enough, that whole thing. But the truth is you find a way to make it fun so you can inhabit your own skin for those 12 or 13 hours a day. So my advice to anybody out there really is just like, I don't know how you make it fun, but just put fun everywhere you can, whether it's a sandwich, whether it's a song, whether it's an outfit you like to wear, whatever the hell it is. Look at your day today, look at your day tomorrow, and just figure out where you can put those little mile markers of fun into your day. And if you get better at, finding more of them, you'll have more fun during the day. I don't know how I became a life coach, for the record, Christian, because I started this by saying comics shouldn't be in charge of anything. And now I'm straight up Dr. Filling America. And I don't appreciate that. You duped me in.
Don't blame me, please. That's a Democratic move. But hey, thank you, Jimmy, for joining the HiTcast. Please subscribe to his great podcast, Everybody Calm Down. It's a place where the left and the right can laugh together again, kind of like we used to. And of course, sports fans can hear him on the Blue Rush podcast, dedicated to my brother's favorite team, the G-Men, the New York Giants. Not a great year, but it's a great podcast. And of course, you can listen to Jimmy's jokes on Fox Business's Kennedy. He's the head writer, and that show is Monday through Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I don't know how you carved out a time for us today, but I'm glad you did, Jimmy, and I hope we can talk again.
Oh, we'll do it again, man. I miss you already. Have a great day.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodandToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodandToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.